Ooh, live.
Alrighty, so then I think I should go over this again. Any preferences for sorting, or should we just go all this to newest?
Nope. Well, yes, by when they were switched. So 22412.
Alrighty, so then I think I should go over this again. Any preferences for sorting, or should we just remember to mute the audio? So sorry, say it again.
22412, I think I said. Yes.
22412.
Yep. And that's basically the transformation status. That's the oldest, waiting for API review. Are we ready for that? Last time we kind of dodged it.
Wasn't that one of the things that we covered in the last 10 minutes and then we ran out of time?
I think we did it more in the middle and then skipped it from reasons.
Yeah, we were waiting for, we wanted Christoph to bring in his other APIs that use this.
Oh, I see. So we should then flip it back to blocked or something, maybe. Stephen, is that in line with your understanding as well?
That's fine, yeah.
Yeah, I think this was just blocking the convert from base64 and then I flip on.
Okay. What's the other one you want to look?
Huh?
What's the next one you want to look at then?
Oh yeah. Sorry. 23862.
23862.
That's a lot of memory of T, so we might actually wait it for next hour, I guess.
Yeah, I think that one. So I talked with Awesome yesterday. Like he didn't feel like he's ready for the review of this one yet.
Okay.
The other one I wanted to talk about was the assemblies, right? Where to put stuff.
I see.
But I think that's something.
So let's flip it to API not ready for review then. If he's not ready.
Yeah, I guess it's fair. I guess API needs work then.
Okay. Yep.
Just respond and said. Awesome mentioned is ready for review.
What was it blocked on, the previous one, the transformation status?
It was blocking the base64 span methods. And then we were waiting for the. Then we made it just be Boolean. Text encoding ones, I think, was the other ones that are not the encoding ones usually.
Okay.
Right, next one.
Yeah.
How do you get
24.
these numbers, by the way? Do you sort? Do you have your own?
No, I just sort manually through the 15 by when they were flipped to API ready for review, so that we don't delay for too long. 24039.
You know, I'm not saying 49. It's good. You've learned since last time.
Come on, I had my low light.
This one, like, Steve, what was the conclusion last time from that one? Christoph didn't understand.
I think Christoph has suggested putting them as on the base stream class, and then we didn't go further than that.
I think we ran out of memory, out of time on this one.
So I think his meta point was, what we do right now here is very specialized on MemoryStream and Unmanaged MemoryStream. Can we generalize that? And I think from what I understand, the answer is no, not really. Is that fair, or is there like a way to do that?
I'd have to think more about how to do it. To generalize them, you'd have to make them virtual as well. And then there's the question of, well, if they're virtual, are you going to sort of recursively hit the same problem?
Right, that's...
But I'll switch this back to blocked or whatever the right status is, and I'll take a look at it.
Let's just say needs work, I guess, is the way to do it, and then it should summarize. And we're done with that. Next one.
Okay, you guys are so fast. So 23,592. And that's meter one. Extremely long title.
Well, but the nice thing is, after reading the title, I don't have to read the fucking proposal.
You sure about that?
No, because it makes sense to me. But like, let's look at the actual proposed API. So, add a read-only list property. Okay, now I'm confused. Thought it's for actually passing arguments, not getting them back. So why would it be a read-only list? That makes no sense.
It's a messy proposal.
Arguments was last assigned to the following. Access parts argument to this, with rules and arguments of last. Oh, I see. So it's I read only list, but it would be assignable. I guess that's interesting.
I think that's basically the way of saying the process itself, the process start info essentially doesn't have the right to modify it.
Right. Well, I mean, the alternative would be that we would give you an API on, let's say, a path where you could say combine arguments or something, or you provide a bunch of things either as an array or something, and then we would give you back a combined string that has the quotes in the right spots.
Well, I think part of the proposal problem is that on Unix we have to parse the string and break it up into a call to exec. And on Windows we need to combine the string to call create process. So that if we had it as an array, we can combine unambiguously, but us parsing is adding another parser to the form.
So why would we have to parse? Right? That's exactly my question. Like if the primary motivation is to make it easier for people to essentially construct, you know, the command line like as one string, then it seems the only thing we need is like a combine method for arguments.
So Emo, the thing is, on Windows, the API you use to start a process takes the command line string, or the argument string, basically.
Okay.
On Unix, it takes an array of the arguments.
Oh, I see. So it means we already have to parse in Unix.
So his proposal is, let me give you the array, I've already chopped it, don't reinterpret my chopping.
I know better.
So then, even if we would give you like a combining API, we wouldn't be able to give you back essentially the string that if you were to parse it again, we would get the same array out of it. Is that the problem?
I mean, we could.
You could classify this problem as, okay, one of them there's not a way for the caller to actually construct the thing in the way they want to, and secondly we double parse, right? Potentially. Or, you know, at least parse unnecessarily, right? Because we could
every
Emo,
parse,
you're paused.
every parse has the potential of being wrong. And that, oh, we thought here you were being clever and using a single quote as a quoted delimiter, but you were trying to get the single quote to be an uninterpreted single quote because the shell that you were using when you want, like, so we're essentially becoming a shell and enforcing our own command line semantics at that point. That we currently have for the arguments string, but I think that the arguments list, whether it be a list or an array or what have you, is more appropriate. And then on Windows, .NET could build the at least there would be only one place that would have errors in building the command line string.
You mean the quotes and stuff?
Yeah, quotes and escaping of nested quotes and.
Right.
So definitely, if we were doing this right now, I would say that we would want the arguments list and not arguments.
I would say that too.
I'm not very pleased with his proposal of how the two things will interact.
It seems a little overly complicated to me.
Yeah, I would say one or the other, and assigning one makes assigning the other throw.
Oh, you want to make it interact somehow?
Yeah.
Well, the only other thing I would say is, like, if you were trying to, like, pass a pretty simple set of arguments, like file names or whatever, you might have a roughly equivalent behavior between the two. Not have to fork, but I don't know, maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it would be fine to assign arguments on Unix. That's what people would be using if they're using process right now. We'll do our existing parse, but if you've already assigned arguments and you assign argument list, then I think we would throw of you have to pick one or the other.
And vice versa. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's probably reasonable. Since the arguments was the pre-existing one, is to make that what we tell people to do if they want to use the same semantics cross-platform.
So the question is...
Then I still don't understand how we could simplify that, because it seems like we would still have to parse the arguments regardless, right?
But we already have that code.
Exactly.
So we would just leave that and we would maintain that, but we're removing... we're letting you get out of situations where we've done the wrong ambiguous parse.
You're basically doing bypass of our own parsing on Linux.
Yeah, and then on Windows, we would then be responsible for combining arguments list into the one arguments call. So we would need to get all the coding right of how create process is going to chop it back up so that it can correctly call main.
Exactly. So it means, like, basically what it means is that we basically effectively have to maintain both the parsing and the combining. In which case, like, do we actually reduce any complexity to maintain that you can assign either one of them and we round trip it to the other side? Because we already have the code, then we might as well just call it.
I just don't think that assigning one should populate the other and let you mess with it and then populate it back to go rebuild the other. Like, pick a paradigm.
It's just hard to kind of wrap your head around the API then, right?
Well, I guess it depends on, like, how this API is being used, right? If you're the only consumer, then yes. As soon as you pass it around to, like, other things to add stuff to it, then it will no longer work, right?
Sure. Well, you can pass it as a...
I suppose one thing it would provide is a better way to, or an easier way to diagnose what's going on if we're populating one from the other based on them being set.
Maybe, but on Windows it means that we'd now be parsing arguments when we weren't before, and if we're different than the process does, then that just is a different class of bugs. Well, arguments list said it was right. It's like, well, PDCC says we can't ever change it once we make it.
True.
So basically you're saying that even though we have the code to do both parsing and combining, like, combining is Windows only and parsing is Linux only.
Yes, we have the code to parse on Linux, and we would have to write code to combine on Windows, but we would never mix the two.
I suppose that's fair.
Oh my goodness.
So basically that would mean that in the same world you would say effectively don't use arguments moving forward, use argument list. This way you don't have to deal with quoting itself.
Yeah, that becomes...
Yeah.
And then what do we...
And then the logic basically is that, like, if the other one's already got something set to it, we throw, and we use whichever one's not null.
Yeah.
With the appropriate...
So that means as soon as you assign arguments, you want to use argument list, and as soon as you use argument list, you can only use arguments. Is that fair?
Yes.
Yes.
Unless you set them back to null.
Yeah.
Yeah, setting null should always work, although setting null is weird on the collection, I suppose. But I guess it's read-only, you can only assign to it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so now there's the question of do we want to have it as a read-only property? do we want to just make it be a non-deep copy array property?
I think people will not expect it to be settable, honestly, because we don't use that pattern anywhere else in the VCL. Usually you can say arguments.add. You don't have to populate this thing, for example, right?
So then it would just be collection.
Yeah, but I think the challenge is now if you want to, track that somebody did something, you basically have to have, something where you can essentially like subscribe to the event. And then you would have to say if somebody actually did something to the collection, then I consider it used, right? I read.
Non-empty.
I guess that's fair.
Using our
it could
our
just
null
say,
logic,
yeah,
it would
that's
be
fair.
if argument list is the empty collect. If argument list is empty, then you're allowed to set arguments, and we have to make a custom collection type to guard against calling add, or we just throw it start saying you've specified both, and I don't know what to do.
Actually, I think that's probably the best way to do it, because that's how process works today. You can do whatever you want, and then when you start, that's what you're going to do.
Yeah. So.
And then we could just say you don't have to like do any crazy gymnastics, so just have to add.
Yeah.
I think that seems reasonable. Then the only question is what type will be exposed to the argument list then? I think we just had this discussion. Like usually we use something like collection of something. We usually don't expose, some things, but.
Well, once we're wanting
mutating it, are we? So why wouldn't we use an interface for this?
But would you expose list of string? I mean, we've
Sure.
not done this in VCL at all.
No, I wouldn't expose this.
Okay, so what would you use then?
Interface.
So you would say I list of string?
as a property return.
Or I read only.
I'm just like, I guess if we were doing the certificate creation API, Christoph said we have a framework design rule that says properties aren't interfaces.
Usually inputs are interfaces, and properties are generally
collection.
Oh, you're looking at what we do?
Like I'm trying to see out other collection types.
Okay.
Like what is verbs?
arrays.
How do you set that guy?
Well,
Set in the constructor.
No. There's the arguments. Actually, you have to add one more distance constructor, I guess, as well. Should.
that must be a thing that we parsed out of the data instead of the thing that we can set.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That sort of colors what we would do for the other one, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It's a similar concept.
Seems like really bad.
Huh?
I think a settable string array is a really bad model. I think we usually don't do that. I mean,
Well, no, but like the setting it and like parsing it and the like. I mean, the other one is you can't even set that thing directly.
Well, you think we are passing verb into verbs?
I suspect. Let me look.
It parses the extension. It does a bunch of stuff with the registry.
What's
Okay.
verb? Process info stuff.
Yeah, so I think this is the this is a .txt file. It has the open and notepad verb.
If only the guy would be here that designed this API and can tell us what he was thinking when he did that. Every time Christoph complains about some APIs we've done, I'm telling them, who designed process again? Yes.
Oh wait.
Christoph
So
did?
they're totally different concepts then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think verb and verbs have just only the name in common, I think.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yep, great design. There's no collection.
Yeah, because I think verb is for if you're using shell execute process, so you're telling it which pre-registered thing to use instead of invoking a command.
Verbs are telling you all the available ones.
Yeah, from a sock or F type or whatever.
And you can change that.
I think I have to read up on that again.
I personally would, if I were writing a proposal, I'd call this non-assignable. It is indexable, and it's clearable.
List of string?
I would make it the property be a get only property with a list of string, and then you can call add, and you can clear, and you can loop over it if you feel like it.
How do you set it?
When you call get, we lazy create it, and once it's created, it's created. You don't get to set it, you just get to build it.
Oh, and then call add on it.
Or add range.
So let me just summarize what you just said. So we would have string arguments which already exist, right? Which is get, set, exists, and then we would have new. Start simple with
Arguments list.
argument list. That's what we call it here. This which would be get only. And then we would say start verifies that arguments is null, empty, or I guess,
Or you could have the empty command.
no, I guess better expressed is that not both arguments is empty, and arguments. Is that fair?
So now the question is, why is it on a list? I think Christoph's argument was the moment that we're auto-populating this to be a list, someone's going to hard cast it. We're going to consider that a breaking change. So why didn't we just man up and call it list when we created it?
Well, I mean, no, like most of the guidelines in the framework have originally been around do not expose implementation types. And then, so don't expose things physically as list of T. And then the problem is also, like in the V1 of the framework, there was no typing, right? So everything was untyped. So if you wanted to have strongly typed collections, you had to create your own collection. That's why we have like string collection, for example.
But the guidance here is read-only collection or collection of T, I think, whatever term types.
That's what I'm saying. I think generally we do not expose iList, for example. We generally expose collection of something. Right?
We can make it doesn't have to be indexable.
Well, we don't really have something that's not indexable.
Usually when we expose it as a collection like this, it's a copy anyways, so you're not containing others.
Yeah, that's true too. But you can't cast this thing to something else, right? You bypass whatever validation you have added.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole point of using collection is so that you can derive, override, and intercept as clear if you ever have to. Like, you can do the same thing with iList, though, but like then you have to like do a whole bunch of different things. I don't quite know what the benefit would be one over the other here. Like, I think that's something we should probably discuss at some point because it's unclear to me what the guidelines actually should be at this point. I think we went back and forth on that one. I mean, personally, I'm fine with iList or I'm fine with collection of T.
I mean, the question is, what does if it's not assignable by the user,
right?
What's the reason we would expose it as an interface instead of a concrete type? Because someone's going to cast it. We're going to consider whatever return type it actually has to be a breaking change if we wanted to change it. So why are we hiding it behind an interface?
I think that's generally fair. Like, I think if you expose an interface, you should probably still have a collection type behind the scenes that is private that you can actually cast.
Right. Like if we want to make an opaque type that they can't cast to anything, so it is iList, but it's not list.
Right.
Then that's we're saying these are the list things you can do to it, and no casting this and doing sneaky things with it.
Yes.
But I think if we would just initialize the backing field to this to, new collection of string or new list of string, that we shouldn't throw the interface out there because we haven't bought ourselves anything. I'm combining DDCC interpretations with framework design guidelines for.
I don't think the compat on .NET Core would be that hard from that perspective.
No, but if you codify it in the API, if you have to bring the API to full framework, you have the same problem on full framework.
This is a type in full framework. will unify.
Sure, but like you'd be able to make a breaking change on one and not the other if you have an interface.
If I expose interface and someone casts, you know, you're out of the weeds. Like I can break you. Sorry. Of course.
Sure.
Every single
And
customer
we can make a conscious decision and write and put quirks around it on the desktop, right?
Jeremy, I think you and Carol are agreeing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I think the one example where we didn't do it on full framework, we tried and we failed, was enumerable.empty. Enumerable.empty used to return you an empty array. And then we said, oh great, now let's actually return it to something else that just implements IEnumerable and doesn't allocate when you actually do the enumeration, right? So we changed the type to some private implementation type that implements IEnumerable correctly. Broke a shit ton of people, because what ends up happening is they construct objects in memory. They, at some point in initialization, say enumerable.empty, and they happen to get an array instance, and they serialize the containing type. The serializing containing type now codifies the fact that it was an empty array, and you drag round tripping serialization. So then it said, great, now let's...
I can totally imagine cases where it breaks, like, absolutely.
I think the problem in practice is when you use interfaces, in many cases, it's not that literally somebody at the call set does a hard cast. It's just, you know,
you pass it somewhere else.
And somebody does a try, the try works now, and the try cast fails tomorrow. You go through a different code path, and then bad things are happening. I think in practice, like I would say on full framework, because it implies updates, like it's too hard, and even on core, I mean, depending on how bad the impact is, you might undo it as well. Like that's why I would generally not assume you can get away with doing what you consider the right thing. However, I think collection of T seems fine as a type.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think there's a problem with that. It seems like these are a safe bet. If I don't find my issue again.
So collection is abstract class, or no?
The collection is a concrete class to which you pass an I-list of T that this guy is wrapping.
Oh.
And then you can do whatever you want. So it seems like that's the design set. Look, that will be what's it called?
I guess I'm not. Collection of T isn't sealed though, right? So what's the difference between that and an interface?
We generally make a copy of that when we hand it back as a collection.
You're saying every access to the property is going to make I mean, but like if someone's doing a cast, they can cast to the whatever.
But they have their.
But we can't copy it if they're going to add to it. That's how they put arguments on it, right?
So the thing that the collection of T solves is that the underlying collection where the data is, nobody can access, right? So you cannot cast away for like the fact that collection of string is wrapping some other list of T, right? So whatever the
no, but I mean, if we were to return a cool internal collection that derived from collection of T, or if we were to return some, I mean, there must be some class in the framework that derives from collection, right? There's like a bunch of them, binding list, keyed collection that are all public. Like if we were to return one of those, someone could actually cast to that, and we would break them if we changed what derived type. It's a similar thing to the interface. We're just saying it's less likely in this case.
Well, the question is no. I think it's the other way around. Like if we would return you in the future a more derived type of collection of string, then yes, you could imagine cases where this breaks people. But in practice, I think it happens more with like the primitive types that people specialize, right? Like list of T arrays. I mean, that's usually the thing where it breaks. I think the meta point is the way collection of T works is that you do not have to do a derived type usually, because you already have the semantics in place to prevent people from writing to the underlying collection directly. But I suppose you have to derive from it anyway if you want to intercept any adds or removes, so I guess that's still fair. Yeah, I guess. I mean, let me put it this way. I think the current guidance is expose collection of T or read-only collection of T, because that's what's in the object model namespace, but that's supposed to give you like control. But we should probably have a more broader discussion about the guidance moving forward, because I think the primary downside of collection of T and read-only collection of T is that they're pretty heavy-handed things because they at least require 2 instances, right? Because you wrap another instance, which makes them not super suitable in cases where you care about applications and performance. I would say this is not an instance of that, but I mean, like I think the point still holds. If you want to do it in other places, I don't think it would do those guys moving forward.
I mean, I'm the one who brought it up. I don't personally care. I just care that, part of what we do in these meetings is make sure that things are consistent. And
Right.
I got called on returning an interface from a property, and so it sticks with me.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's the point. I mean, we should just agree on what the semantics are, and what the guidance should be. I think we had a conversation with Crystal. We also didn't recall what the current guidance is, which is kind of concerning.
By the way, the video is paused again. Just the video, but screen shows well.
Yeah.
What about Atsushi's request for like having an API to parse and combine exposed? When I asked that be put in a.
Do we really want to try owning argument splitting on Windows?
I don't.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I think that having it as public API makes sense if we were going to do each one updates the other, because then we were effectively giving you that as a side effect of using ProcessStartInfo. But if we've said we'll just verify it at process.start if you haven't done both things, then it doesn't make sense anymore, and now it's a completely new feature request.
Did we decide what the semantics of combining that list is going to be?
Maybe.
The argument list. The arg list, they can add them individually, and then when we have to combine them and pass them down.
Yeah.
What's the semantics for that? That's
I mean,
forward everything, space everything.
It's hard, but I think since we're just calling process.start, we don't need to necessarily guarantee to people what our coding rules are, just that Windows will parse it back into the same array. And that's
Process.start takes a string in there.
Yeah.
We have to give it a string, so we have to take that list and convert it.
Well, process.start takes a process.start.info.
No, I meant the actual.
Right. So create process takes a string. So process.start on Windows would be responsible for taking the array and combining it in a way that create process will chop back apart so that the arg view list is correct.
That's what I'm asking. If they decided what the semantics of that is.
I don't know. Hey, other Jeremy, how hard is that?
I'd have to look and see what they're doing.
I mean, I can imagine people putting arguments in, they put quotes in their strings when you pass the argument.
Yeah.
We've now quoted again. We have detected there's quotes and not quoted.
Like I think that I think the semantics of the API should be whatever appears in the array here is what appears in the args array in the process you call. And so if you put a double quote in it, then a double quote needs to make.
But so that means we're not quoting anything.
Sure. Can we guarantee that?
Well, I think we are quoting it if you put a space in it.
This is my point.
Yeah, no, so I guess I'm as a user of this API, I expect that the reason that I'm using it is I can tell you precisely that I want arg2 to be hello space world, and that it's .NET's job to make sure that happens.
Yep.
Yeah, this is why it becomes really tricky.
Why?
Converting these things is close to rocket science. If you've ever done it yourself.
Well,
one of these quotes end up with
when you're going through like command shell stuff and things like that, I'm not sure about the process API, right? The create process. I'll take a look at it.
Yeah,
let's go with Jeremy's intent.
There's going to be a lot more rules that have to be figured out, though.
Yeah, and so I think that it'll probably mean that we should work with Windows on it. But the good news is we don't have to work with anyone on Unix because you gave us the array and we're going to do it by golly. So, like Unix is you give it the array, so you gave us the array. We'll still keep whatever parsing logic we had, but that will essentially be the dead path now.
I mean, we can probably start on Windows to just do the quoting and, like, for example, adding a threading space for the quoting rules.
That's going to fall apart very quickly.
Why? Because, I mean, that's effectively what MSBuild and other things are doing when they construct process startup infos today.
And you have to pass the arg string yourself.
Well, no, I mean, MSBuild does combine arguments very often. When
you combine arguments, you got to worry about trailing slashes. You got to worry about other quotings going on.
And other people already implemented that. So let's just like do our implementation, or take one.
I think part of the reason why we don't have a command line parser is because of some of these things, but we need to clearly call.
Well, I mean, like, to be fair, I don't think it's like trivial. I also don't think it's like quite as bad as you painted. I think, like, I mean, rocket science is a bit overstretched.
Fusion is worse. A little bit, but yeah.
I mean, our team owns regex, which I think is way worse to parse than whatever coding was Windows
by this numerous times that it's going to call out that we needed to define the symmetrics.
Oh, sorry, that's why they paid the big bucks, by the way. So I don't think that's can use that excuse forever, but yeah. All right. Are we happy with that then, as a painted it, or should we?
Technically, the caller may use arguments or arguments list, but not both. They could leave both unset, which is the empty.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. All right, next one. Fuck, I keep building these things.
This one will be easier, hopefully. 24, 115. Stephen, you're up. Array.Sort.
So Array.Sort has a few overloads today. The only overloads that there are two overloads that take array offset and count. One that just takes array offset and count, and one that takes an I comparer of T, the interface for comparison. There's no overload that takes the comparison of T delegate, even though the implementation was changed such that it actually works in terms of a delegate. So if you pass in the interface, we have to allocate a delegate from the interface. I'm suggesting we just add the overload that takes the delegate directly.
Okay. Do we have span sorting anywhere?
Good question. Don't know.
I don't think we do. Yes.
It's coming.
I don't think we did that because basically it used that span is usually like bytes and you rarely want to sort bytes.
What if I want all the bytes with an odd number of bits set to come first?
Then you create an array, you call the method here, and then you get back a span.
That's right. I mean, just anywhere that I see, an array and an index and a length, I wonder if...
No, it's totally fair. I think we brought it up, and it's just, I think when I talked to Christopher, he said nobody ever asked for sorting in spans yet, so we haven't done it.
That's
I think
cool.
it's
cool.
asked more questions. Stephen, do we have any other overloads with like I compare versus I comparison, versus comparison of T? Or is
We probably do somewhere, but I don't actually know. Let's see. Comparison of T.
What about on list stuff?
Yeah.
Let's see. We've got, so there's some in system collections immutable that take comparison or I compare.
List takes both.
List takes both. Yeah.
And list doesn't support, I think, index and length, right? So that's why it's probably not important.
Right.
It has index and count.
No, it does. It has index and count with the interface, but not with the delegate.
But not with the delegate.
Okay, then should we fix that too?
I missed the one.
Yeah. So we should probably add it to list of T as well.
Yeah.
And Justin pointed out that I got the name of the parameter wrong, so it should be comparison instead of compare.
Honestly, 90% of the feedback I get from Justin is parameter names are fucked up. Like, he's really good at that. You should hire the guy, actually. On the other hand, though, it's much cheaper if we keep it as an open source person. Anyway, so...
He voluntarily gave up his salary while still working. So, get my company money.
It's good to,
Hi, Justin.
Next one. Go. Next one.
Oh, sorry. 24,105. We're getting to 19 days old thingies. Not bad.
Okay. Seems like nobody has any concerns, so I go with approve. Seems like a no-brainer.
Yep. Next. Ready?
Yep.
Are we worried about breaking anything there?
Well, it hasn't shipped yet, so
I don't know, but I'm just.
Well, yeah. Mono is,
Is
trying to take snapshots of master, but now they're stuck, so.
Yeah, do we have a NetFX target for span? Like, do we need to rush this to the other side of the fence?
Come again?
It's staying for the next couple releases?
Yeah, it's not going in. Yeah.
What's OOP, sorry?
Span. As far as .NET Framework's concerned. I'm just.
Yeah.
We're at the wonderful window of time now where we can talk about both products. So
Yeah.
if we want to make a change now and try and shove it over the fence.
No, it's much.
quickly,
Yeah. It's OOP, but the point is that, once we ship it in one of the platforms, it's gonna be, we cannot iterate on the OOP, right? So.
Right, but if we were trying to add it to.
Yeah. As far as I know.
what's happening again? Oh, God damn it. Resume call. Okay. Hello, friends on Skype.
Hello.
If only we had a proper product, it wouldn't keep the call on hold every 20 seconds. We could actually have a discussion. All right, next issue.
There's int PTR and uint PTR. I don't think we have time for that in 10 minutes, so let's skip that one. 23,874.
StreamWriter constructor pooling overloads. Oh, Ben filed this.
Ban is up.
Rejected by the construction.
So, the fundamental issue here that this came out of my concern about us using pooling in places where we can't guarantee safety of the pool. So, in the async methods, there's a chance that you could be writing to pools that were returned back to or buffers that were returned back to the pool. So in this particular case, we want it to be an opt-in sort of thing. And rather than just have a bunch of parameters that say use buffer pooling, it's better to allow you to actually specify which array pools you want to use, because that opens up other. It's a simpler API and also opens up other more advanced scenarios. Like say using the same buffer, you can write your own array pool and use the same buffer through a whole series of calls, or one for one that returns the same one for every thread, because you're being serial on the threads.
So where did we land with our discussion back in the day where we talked about us using array pooling in the VCL? I can remember the discussion exactly what you just said, that we feel like if we were all to use the same static instance of the array pool, what ends up happening is that one customer misuses one API in area 1, spectacularly bad things may happen in a completely unrelated area because they happen to use the same pool.
Yeah.
So we use it in a bunch of places now internally, but every place we've used it thus far, it would require some significant gymnastics to return a buffer to the pool that you were still using. This case is one that sort of gets closer to the line of you could misuse the APIs in a way that would result in us returning the buffer to the pool while you were still potentially using it. Like if you made an async call and then immediately disposed of the stream while the async call of the writer while the async call was still in flight, which is totally unsupported. But the concern is if you did that, you could return a buffer while you were still using it. Someone else across your process might pick it up, and you would sort of spooky actions at a distance.
Yeah.
I think there are a variety of opinions on the team about how important that is. I worry that we're shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit by trying to protect ourselves against that case. I also worry a little bit that we're tying a very core type in StreamWriter to array pool via public API, rather than array pool being an implementation detail that we could change at will. We're tying it very close to the type. Now that said, there are certainly benefits of being able to control what the pool is that you want to use. If you don't want to use the shared one, you can maintain your own pool and provide that. I am slightly concerned that we're going to find ourselves with array pool 2 in the future, or memory pool, or someone's going to want to use StreamWriter with their own native block of memory, and they're or their own memory things, and so they're going to want to be handing out memories from owned memories and stuff like that, and we will have sort of tied ourselves to array pool specifically. But these are all just sort of minor concerns. At its core, it seems reasonable.
Yeah, so like Stephen, do you think if it would allow you to pass in the pool, like you have the same problem, right? Like whether we use a pool or pass in the pool doesn't change that, right?
Yeah,
well,
but you're opting into it.
Well, yeah, I mean, both allow you to opt into it, right? Like neither of them makes it transparent for you, right?
Oh, both proposals here?
No, like
yeah,
I think you said you would rather have, like, instead of having a pool where you say use buffer pooling, you would rather see the pool actually being passed in, right?
I would, yes, because it allows some other tweaking.
Right.
That at least in my investigations that I'm having so far, look like they could potentially be useful for certain scenarios.
But you
like keeping.
I think it's safer to do that too, which I don't think is what Stephen was saying. I think the fundamental problem that we have is that whether you pass in the instance yourself or not, like unless you actually maintain the pool yourself, you still have the spooky action and the distance problem, right?
Yeah. If you're misusing the pool, but the bigger deal is that like if we're implicitly doing that for people and actually using the pool, that you're suddenly dependent on all your dependencies actually using StreamWriter correctly.
Yes.
And that's my part of it. It's like if you want to get into the advanced usages and pass your own pool in this case because it's a little bit more dangerous, then fine, by all means do it. And if we're going to do that, might as well open up the scenarios that like, hey, all I want for this array pool is that like I just wanted to, and I think I gave an example down there, is I want to have the same buffer on a thread local, right?
Right.
And it doesn't do any extra logic or whatever else, and it's highly tuned for this particular server scenario, whatever.
I mean, if we think that array pool, if there's a chance that we're going to want to mutate it soon and be sad of any place that we put it in a constructor, then taking the Boolean proposal and turning it into a default arguments thing so we can solve the thing where people want to specify leave open but don't know what the default buffer size is. Like that seems fine. If we think array pool is going to be stable, I've actually, while been using it in some work I've been doing, I've been wondering if we just call array pool shared everywhere, why was it really a class or an instance class, and should we be accepting array pools and things that are doing pooled memory so that people can't control that?
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a meta design question of when should we be using shared versus letting someone give us a pool.
Yeah, and that's sort of related to this as well, and that's why I wanted to bring this up, because this is starting to, this would be the start of a pattern, more than likely.
I think Stephen's argument was also that, there was, I think...
I totally hear what Stephen is saying on that, and I understand that, and I think it's not a horrible thing if we end up with, another constructor on these types down the road if we find something more useful than array pool.
But, my question would be, array pool is an abstraction, right? Clearly this thing has to deal with arrays, right? Yeah. Because that's how the StreamWriter works underneath the cover. So, what would we do that would say array pool is unsuitable for our purposes?
If we decided we didn't want to work with arrays and we wanted to work with arbitrary pieces of memory.
Span. A local Alex.
Like span.
But how would, I guess, yeah, because we deal with Stream and Stream supports spans now, I guess that's fair.
I mean, I could see somebody wanting to do a thing with native memory or whatever, but now what we have is array pool, and if we were to make that more generic to be memory pool later, then we'd need to write that. And I don't know that it would beat even the next release of Core. So.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a horrible thing to have like a couple of these things in the long term.
Yeah, and if later
if we're adding another one that takes memory pool instead of array pool.
Yeah, and if we make a memory pool that returns back a span of where you can write, it can certainly somebody could make one that wraps array pool, and then this constructor will just call the other constructor with do the array backed memory pool. So.
Right. I suppose it's fair. So
Not
to bring in the
not
to bring in the OOB discussion again, but to bring in the OOB discussion again, this will be giving a very core type a dependency on a type that's currently out of band.
So it'll force the type to go in band faster.
Array pool is out of band? No.
Well, it's not on core.
It's not part of the platform on core?
No, it is.
It's in the shared framework.
It's in private call on core.
But it's not
so as inbox as it gets.
But it's not in
desktop. This would definitely make the array pool now have to be pushed to desktop.
Right.
That's not that much problem, right?
No. Well, I know somebody on the team will be very sad about that, but at the same time, I mean, you can't have it, both ways, right? I mean, like if you want, like either you want StreamWriter to be able to use it or you don't. But as soon as you do, like there's no other design that would allow you to do that.
Which is just why I mentioned it. This is the first time we're talking about exposing API that take instances of it.
Yeah.
So right now it's an implementation detail anywhere that uses it, and this moves it into the realm of, well, to use it, you pass one in.
I mean,
we're starting to deviate, by the way, between core and desktop because like a lot of our code is actually starting to use it, certainly in the IO space, the array pool, and like what we have on desktop can't.
Well, that's not true. You just can't share the same pool, but desktop would certainly use its own internal copy.
Yeah. But like we would have to copy it over there eventually. I mean, we haven't done it yet, but like it seems like all signs are pointing to like we're going to have at least the implementation there.
Right. I'm just saying there's a big difference between the implementation and the public surface area.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, there is the meta pattern point of like it is a type that is instantiable for things other than the shared pool. Do we have guidelines of when?
Is that your software?
I think he just doesn't like when I'm talking, and he needs to like make Jeremy shut up button, which happens to disconnect Skype.
3 words at the beginning of your speech, and I lost the rest.
Yeah, emails.
And don't repeat it because otherwise it's gonna stop again.
I was pointing out that we've made this be a type that people can create their own of, and at some point, people being able to create a custom pool with custom characteristics and are using pools in places, those two things are gonna need to meet. And if nobody's asking for it now, they will eventually. So we will eventually need to decide how we're going to let people control our pool characteristics.
Yep.
And doing it per API like this can be particularly useful, or particularly usage, right?
Maybe. I think there's probably some crossover point, though, where you see this with any kind of pooling. You start ending up with lots of different pools, and they all compete for resources, and at the end of the day, you actually end up with worse perf.
Yeah, and we want to try and encourage the other things, but there are very specific scenarios like the ones I'm talking about where like you don't need the overhead. You're gonna like spin up like 4 or 5 threads that are all working like kind of serially, you know, right on writing stuff, but on multiple files right in a row. Like no need to like put any extra overhead on it. Keep reusing the same pool for that particular thread. I mean, the same buffer for that thread. That allows you to do that, right?
Sure. I mean, the existing implementations already try and use TLS for a buffer or two before going to a more global pool.
Sure.
So, sounds like what we were saying is that there's like 2 classes of problems we have with that API. One of them is the spooky action at a distance kind of thing, where any sort of opting in at least makes the scope smaller, so it's not like magic that everybody magically gets, and if people screw up the behavior, that they magically break other things now which they haven't broken before. And then the second part of it was the question of like, what happens if we have to change essentially our pooling abstraction, because today it's very tied to array, and with that is also the general question of like, how soon does .NET Framework have to have this API in the API service, right? And so it seems to me like if we were going down the bool path, like basically what we would say is like it's opt-in because you have to pass true, and because we don't actually expose the type, it's potentially possible for us to change the way we do the pooling. Right? We could either change it to the memory pool that we use internally, or it could be array pool, or it could be some homegrown custom thing just for StreamWriter, right?
It could also be corked in some fashion.
Yes. So that to me indicates that, I mean, I understand what Jeremy was saying, that it's more advanced, and it allows for more advanced scenarios to pass in the pool, but it seems like, a more conservative starting point would be to just expose it as a bool, and then either we come up with a better abstraction for array pool in the future, like memory pool, that can give you basically a memory, which could be baked by arrays or by arbitrary native memory, then that may be the better path.
So take, on the previous proposal, the last proposed constructor, and switch it to default value. Like in the new proposal, they switched to one default value constructor. So they got all the arguments in, but then you can get away with specifying only one. I know that a lot of people complain that we let the pool leave open past buffer size and never exposed what the default buffer size was. And so once you wanted to specify leave open, you have to use reference source to look and see what default buffering looks like.
You can solve that if you want by exposing the default buffer size as a property.
Yeah, but
that's what's there.
But I mean, we've now started adding the default valued parameters. So doing a default value parameter to add this new parameter and default everything else seems legit.
Yeah, if you have it like this, right? If you take these guys, and we would say, what is it called? Bool.
Ooh. Yep. Dick.
Use
bike
buffer pool false, right?
Yep.
You could now do new StreamWriter, some stream. Let's say use buffer pool.
Yep.
Those existing arguments aren't currently default. They don't currently have defaults, right? They're not currently optional.
Correct.
And making them optional like this doesn't introduce ambiguities?
No, because there's from a C# standpoint, what ends up happening is there's only one that takes essentially this argument, right?
Well, there's only
this parameter, I should say.
Well, once we get into the named parameters, everything's fine. There's probably one that takes just a stream, but as long as all of our default optionals are the same as what that constructor would do, the compiler will pick the exact match as a better target, and then there's not runtime ambiguity of why does it do a different thing depending on which of these two I mount to.
Yeah, but now you're introducing a dependency that's it's really hard to reason about. Like if you ever change the defaults, you need to, in the constructor, you have to remember to go change the value of the default, like the default value of the name parameter to match. Otherwise, you just create
it next to each other, right?
They are next to each other. Refer into the optional one.
Sure.
I mean, you practically speaking, you can't change defaults anyway.
Yeah,
like, I mean, like,
because they're baked as constants.
No. In the named arguments, yes, but you can if you're not if it, the default with one parameter constructor had like in the definition, like I'm setting some defaults myself. Those are the ones that you can change without realizing that they were used by someone else. But if you just pass it through as you said, it's probably fine.
Yeah. So
you know what I mean?
So StreamWriter.
Like if they're not captured in an attribute, they're captured in code.
no, that's what I'm
Like
saying. Like if you have a current pattern, we basically just add like more overloads, and we just chain them. Like practically speaking, we still can't change the defaults because like if we decide in release 1 we ship a buffer like a buffer size of 2048.
Yes, you're right.
We can say like 4069 the next release anyway. Like even if it's a code, right?
The only concern was that if you're not chaining them, but if you can chain them, then yes, it should be fine. Like if one can't call the other and it just works, then yes.
But I'm not talking about whether you can do it mechanically. I'm saying you would break customers if you would change the default value from 2048 to 4996. If it was just from a compet standpoint, changing defaults is potentially pretty bad. Like we haven't done this anywhere.
I don't know. I think we've changed defaults quite a lot of places. The serializer just changed the size of the array that they use for deserializing. So that's the default that they've changed with no compat. Right. So we do change
this. If I remember correctly, we changed the size of the buffer used in copy to or copy to async at one point.
Yep. So we do change defaults.
I don't want to hear it.
As soon as you find that someone else has baked in version, older value, it's
you work on compat, right? Like brace yourself. See cover as long as you can.
As I said, we make smart choices sometimes, and sometimes we don't.
Sometimes we're not smart.
So the choice is not smart. Not saying that we're not smart.
So the smartest choice you can make right now is seek another job. So you can like run away before the impact hits.
Run.
Right. So like I think generally speaking, I mean, we did talk about default parameters before. It seems to me that this one at least avoids the overload explosion that we would add with this one.
Yep.
Stephen brings up a good point of like what's ambiguity like, but I think if you would say, like stuff like this, buffer size, I don't think you would hit ambiguity because...
Well, you have to put a different number, like 0 or something, but yeah.
Actually, this will probably call the existing one that just takes stream and buffer size, I suppose.
Well, that one will fail it.
Will it?
Buffer size isn't it.
Oh. I call it out.
Well, yeah, there's that, but like...
So it goes from stream to stream encoding to stream encoding int to stream encoding int pool. And
so which one do we have? So we have stream encoding pool.
Stream encoding int pool. So if you were to say stream comma encoding colon UTF-8, the compiler will still prefer the existing 2-argument constructor because it's an exact match.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, whether or not the compiler will do it, the language spec says that the compiler needs to do it. One of them is describing what a tool does, the other is describing what a tool should do.
Yeah, I think what is the problem is if we mix and match.
Compilers never have bugs. You're using it wrong.
Jared would agree with that. And we should probably add the one for the string constructor as well, which I don't think was talked about here. There's one that takes stream and one that takes string.
Yeah.
Can we stop doing that?
I mean, we can.
No, I'm asking. Like, haven't done this in a while. Do we still take strings as?
Yes, we do. Okay.
All right.
Path APIs back and that's screwed.
Yeah.
But like now you actually have a problem now. Like,
why?
Well, I guess string is required, right? And stream is always required. So technically, you always have a unique prefix that the compiler can key it off of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's fair.
They're not both introducing a 0 specified call.
So do we need the one with the path?
I'm just looking at the shape of what we have right now, and
Sure.
the only thing that's missing off of the one that takes a path is the Boolean leave open, which makes no sense because we open the stream on your behalf and you can't get it. So
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I guess you could be patient.
I'm not sure that we, like...
If we don't care, we don't care. I'm just pointing out it's there.
Yeah, but I don't know. Do we actually need the constructor with with the use buffer pool for path? Or just say if you want to be actually using the buffer pool, you have to actually create the stream yourself.
We could do that, but I mean, like, generally speaking, I mean, I don't know. Like, I totally would like to do that. Like, ignore buffer pooling for a second. I would totally like to do new StreamWriter path leave open true. To which you say you can't. Like, you physically have to pass the other guy.
Again, the leave open is the only thing we don't specify on the one that takes a path because it makes.
That's true. Actually, I've seen that before. Well, actually, no. Why would you want to leave this?
Why do you want to leave this open?
Because or how do you close it?
You can't.
Actually, that's a good point. Like,
leave open is the one that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, exactly. That's the only one.
I mean, technically, you can grab it back from the base stream property, but
yeah, never mind. Bad example on my part. Yeah, I guess it really begs the question. I mean, like, I guess encoding the buffer size would still be available, right?
So it would be if you wanted to say path, comma, buffer size, colon, 1024.
I think my general principle would be, like, I mean, I don't know, like, if you believe in paths being convenient, then we should just follow the same thing. And it seems like there's not an ambiguity problem with this pattern to do that. And it just means if we have to add more parameters, we always have to add them in pairs. But that seems fine.
With the exception of leave open.
I
mean, we can let somebody say leave it open. We'll just, like, the reference will hang out until it gets hit by the finalizer.
Well, yeah. I mean.
So we have to leave the leave open in there?
No, I would remove it. It makes no sense of that, right? Like.
Yeah. Do we now prefer APIs with default parameters? I know that at some point that was like against the guidelines.
No, the problem with parameters, with default parameters, was that there was this concern that we don't know how to version them properly. Okay. And then we talked with the C# team, and they basically had a nice model to do it, and we signed off on this like a year and a half ago. Like, I think the problem that we have in cases like this is that you don't have like a single kind of overload, right? You basically have different groups of overloads that are effectively identified by a unique prefix. In our case, like path versus stream. But as long as that's the case, it's fine. It's more problematic when you have like optionality with like where the prefix itself will be optional.
Well, then the prefix like
then becomes
empty,
like
right?
impossible to reason about which one is being picked. But in the general case, we just have essentially one kind of method. You just add more arguments over time. That's fine. Okay. So basically, what you do is just add a new method, make everything optional essentially, and then on the old one you make everything required.
I see. Okay.
And this is the way you would version this thing.
Okay. Thanks.
So I think a bit because the problem that we will try to avoid is this madness, right? That we have to always add like 5 overloads because we added like one thing. Like.
Or all the combinations of those.
Yes, and that's pretty bad. And then the other problem that we have is that things like file stream, where you only want to specify the last one, or we force you to pass in 6 other things, it's just bad. Like, defeats the point.
No combinatoric.
Alright,
so where did we land? Sorry.
So I think that's the conclusion. Anybody disagrees with that? Based on what we said?
Steve, Jeremy?
You guys still there?
I'm fine with this. Okay. I'd love to get the configurability in the future. But I understand getting a more meta thing than array pool.
Emo, are you still there?
it's, I think, the combination with the USB drivers, I think.
Yeah,
What
so
about
with yeah, I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say the only thing with the bool I would say is if we are just doing a bool, then maybe we should think again about whether it actually needs to be in the API or whether there's another sort of environmental way to opt in.
But then you would opt in pretty much every future instance that's being created, right? Doesn't that defeat the opt-in characteristic that you're looking for?
I mean, it depends what the concerns are. So I will admit I fall on the side where I'm not concerned about the misuse. But that's me. And so for me, it seems like if you're concerned about misuse, you should be concerned about misuse in your whole process.
But building from with it, it's like you really don't necessarily have, a really good handle on how well all the your dependencies are actually handling a scenario like this.
Well, you never have a handle on what bugs your dependencies have.
Sure, but like the bugs that are there now don't have the same sort of like far off side effects that this would have.
Maybe.
I think we lost him again.
No, I'm still there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good.
I mean, there's nothing that prevents, Jeremy, one of your dependencies from just using array pool directly.
Sure, absolutely.
And messing up the use of array pool directly.
Yeah. There's kind of a meta thing there. I don't want to get into it now. Is like whether there should be two, one for our own use, and one for all others. But I don't know.
Yeah, but even then, does every component end up having its own? Because if not, it doesn't matter whether it's us. It doesn't matter whether it's core effects versus non-core effects. It could be library A versus library V versus library C versus library D.
Sure. But if we're establishing a pattern here too, this can help for other people that start to use array pool if they know they're using it in some ways that they don't want to guarantee. If you don't use the type correctly, they can follow the same pattern. Like, hey, there's risk here, or hey, there's no risk. Because we could make this no risk. The thing is, it just would create a lot of.
So is it fair to say that there's a more meta discussion we should probably have on pooling then? Like, I mean,
yeah.
Pool this API independently and like do this other thing, because it seems to me that we really do not fully either agree or fully understand the impact of what either of these decisions may mean, right? Like, I mean, I'm kind of with Steven on I don't think the fallout would be that bad, but on the other hand, like, I could totally see desktop code being completely broken if we were to default or opt in existing things. There may be even bugs in our framework if we don't handle the scopes correctly in all cases, and it's just today unobservable. And
yeah, I mean, to be clear, I don't think we would have to provide either. We would have to have desktop be opt-in via quirk, or we'd have to provide an opt-out via quirk. I am 100% sure there'll be code broken by this. I mean, that's sort of not my concern. My concern is we're sort of codifying the notion that because code might have bugs, you have to call new APIs.
Right. Well, yeah, quirking would be one way to address the, in-place update scenario, but I mean.
Well, where else do we have the case like this, though, where we're actually, like, a bug can actually spread this thing into some remote?
Anything that accesses any static property that's settable?
Or interrupt, right? If you override memory, like, you can totally tear down unrelated parts of the system easily, right? I mean.
Yeah.
Unsafe code?
Yeah.
Well, unsafe, like, but this is not unsafe code. I mean, not from an end user perspective.
No,
neither is calling into a library that uses unsafe code.
Sure.
Sure.
Can you guys hear me now?
Welcome back.
So the funny thing is I could hear you, so I was assuming when I can hear you, you can hear me. But
Oh, interesting.
so what I was saying is that it seems to me that effectively we are we're leaning towards the bool, but at the same time we still don't know quite what buffer pooling will look like. What would be nice, I think, because I kind of agree with your gut feel, Stephen, but I mean at the same time I'm not sure we can do this in abstract API review. It seems almost like something we should run an experiment on where we turn on buffer pooling across the BCL for like some preview build and see how bad things are when we do that. And if the world is going to end, well then we know. If the world is not going to end, well we know that too. But like I think it's a more complicated question of like, you know, how do people use our APIs in practice? You know, what does it look like when you compose stuff across library boundaries? Like, do people, you know, crash like, you know, the spooky action of the distance, I think, is something that is very hard to, like, I think, get a handle on in abstract terms. Otherwise, it's a never-ending discussion on gut feel.
How do you want to run the experiment? Like, where would you run it?
Core. In the preview version of Core. I would ship a preview where it's on, and then see how bad the microphones get. It's certainly not a scientific experiment as in like, you know, we get universal coverage, but like, if we get like 10 bug reports in a preview, that may be bad, right?
I was told like, no, what do you want to preview?
So
new APIs?
Imagine we would take CoreFX, and we would take, you know, StreamWriter, StreamReader, all the other APIs, and silently turn on using array pool.
Oh, I see.
Ship a preview and then see, okay, how many times to give people like symptoms of spooky action at a distance. And I mean, that, you know, it's never going to be like a super representative sample size we get, but I mean, at least you get a little bit more real world data than, you know, us sitting in an API review and pontificating over how people may or may not use the APIs, right?
Can you guys still hear us?
Yep.
Cool. So one of the other things we discussed on the relevant thread was there are variations to how much protection the code can take. So it's possible to make StreamWriter safe against all of this possibility of misuse, but it comes at runtime costs. It's possible to have a middle ground where it protects against some things with a little bit of runtime cost, but probably not prohibitive, and shield yourself against kind of the worst possible misuses that would have the worst possible effects, but you know, not protect against all possible misuses. And so we could do experiments if we have the ability to do experiments where we pick whatever we think the right middle ground is or the extreme, and we run with that, and then we, you know, change the dial.
So are we okay with like marking this as like needs more thought or something, or needs more work? I guess is the way. It seems like we don't know what the answer is.
Well, how do we close on that? I mean, there's a concrete benefit that they're getting from this, the dependency on this.
Well, we need someone to come back with proposal.
Well,
Proposal. What do we do about the array pool? Someone thinking it through, right? You know, it doesn't make sense to think it through over here. And if it means to set up a meeting and discuss it in like closer set of people, that's part of that part.
I don't think it's a matter of a proposal. I think it's because I think we know everything that you can know abstractly. Like I think we all agree of like, oh yeah, that could be bad. It's just that people on the team have a different gut feel for how bad is and like how pervasive that thing is. And I don't think we can do to get that data by just spending more time thinking about it. I think this is almost like something where we actually have to do something concretely, gather data and see what happens. I think fundamentally, like this whole idea of us, for example, using pooling and, you know, exposing buffers is relatively new. We have not done that level of like, you know, performance optimizations in a mainline API. And so I'm not feeling entirely guilty for saying this API is blocked for now because it's a new area. We want to take our time to get it right, but at the same time, I think it needs to be an actionable item on somebody's plate to say, okay, run an experiment with that, and we put it on.
Oh, you mean the enabling it for everywhere?
Yeah, because I think that's the. I think that's the. I mean, so I think the matter of concern here is like, okay, let's say we add the API on StreamWriter, right? And next week somebody's asking for StreamReader. Next week somebody's asking for, and then suddenly, like over time, we build up massive sharing on the same array pool instance, and suddenly the symptoms of spooky action at a distance start to hit you. Unfortunately, at that point, you're done. Like you already have the APIs, people use it, and now the problem is what do you do with it? If you only take pools everywhere, you could potentially create like isolated islands of pools, but then I'm not sure like these vertical pools are actually helping you because it's still unrelated stream readers that could interfere and unrelated stream writers that could interfere, right? So it seems like it's almost like let's just turn it on, as far as we can think of doing this in the VCR, and then see when we maybe run our tests and we ship it to customers and get feedback, and see like how many instances do we see where things are actually corrupting unrelated state. And I think you kind of have to try it on the real world, like with customers, right? I think test coverage alone is not good enough. What do you guys think?
That makes sense to me, but I realize I'm the stick in the mud here. So.
Well, I'd like to unblock there was Ben Adams had a huge change related to this, right? That's where the discussion came through. I'd like to see those perf improvements come in. Just wondering if that's possible, and then like actually adding the then turning it off afterwards, I guess, by adding these APIs by default.
With bans, there are a couple of options. We can tell ban, no, sorry, we don't want to take it right now. Another option is actually take his original stuff without the opt-in, which means default, and that's what we have been talking about here, right? So flighting that, trying it out, that may be option. With the with the caveat that hey, if we find out it breaks stuff too much, we will back it out.
Then there's a matter of tracking these things too. I mean, because there's significant performance improvements that can be gotten from some of these things, from using array pool in these more gray areas.
So how about this? I mean, like this is an API that would go like with 2.1 or something, right? Which we don't ship like tomorrow.
Yeah.
Then let's say, okay, let's improve the API for now. Let's get the performance, the improvement in that particular area, and let's do the gathering of like a more pervasive buffer pooling somewhere along those lines. And I mean, if you only enable it for StreamWriter for now, I also think it's not too bad. Like I'm more concerned of the slippery slope kind of thing where we sprinkle this buffer pooling across a bunch of types, and then that's the point where we get hit. But that's then also the point where we can do the least about this whole thing. So I would like to be a bit more proactive about it, but at the same time, I also understand that there's individual feature work that I don't want to block either.
So that means taking the perf wins for stream buff.
So I would enable it for StreamWriter, but if there's like 5 more requests for adding this thing across the board, I would say, okay, let's
Are you talking about the change, or are you talking about the bool in a API?
I'm talking about the bool here.
Okay.
So I would approve the bool. Our implementation will probably use the shared array pool, right? And then we get the performance improvements in this particular area. We get the performance data that we want. But if we now start to sprinkle this thing across more types, like if next week Ben files it for StreamReader, and then the week after it's for I don't know, some other I/O APIs that we have. At some point, I think we should say, okay, we're not doing that many things in 2.1 because we feel like we don't have enough coverage to know how bad this spooky action at a distance kind of thing may become.
So take the proposal as it is, and then like start applying the brakes a little bit more as it spreads.
Yes.
Or attempts to spread.
Yeah, like basically what I'm trying to avoid is like gung ho of like, oh, suddenly we have like the whole API is on one array pool instance, right?
Sure. So that would make it approved then.
We have the option as well to say like it's not opt-in, it's always on. We don't want that?
Yeah, I feel like that may be a little bit too disrupting. Okay. I don't know, Jeremy.
I think that, to me, I don't don't remember the details from the thread and what was actually tried or not, but it is possible to make it completely safe or mostly safe, except for like very strange access patterns. So to Carol's point, we could see what the hit would be for one of those, and if the pooling still outweighs the costs of, the extra safety, then we could just have it be always on and see if there's any fallout from it without having to add any APIs. But they may have already tried that.
Yeah, that's actually the correctness. I forgot about that angle. So one-off approval.
If we do go with a bool, I think we need to name it something that doesn't guarantee buffer pooling will be used.
Come again?
Right now, the bool argument was something like use buffer pooling, which suggests that if you set it to true, it will use buffer pooling. I think we need to reserve the option to not use buffer pooling. It should be like allow buffer pooling, or something that's not guaranteeing that we will actually pool buffers.
I think that's
In
fair.
case that we want to change our mind, like if someone opts in for the buffer pooling already with the true, like why would you take it away in future?
If it made something worse. If let's say we found a way to not use buffers at all.
Let's see. Okay, fair enough.
So, is it still fair to say then, like, I'm still a little bit lost at like what you guys think of opt-in versus opt-out? Like, if what's true, what Steven just said is like, if we can make it mostly safe, maybe opting out is good enough. Because on desktop we can quirk it, and we can say, force, whatever 7x series gets, the non-pooling behavior, and as soon as you recompile against the thing where this, where this thing ships, is like you're opting, you're by default running on the pool, and like.
So opting out, you wouldn't want to do through an API in that case.
Or
here's my preference. I would love to see if we could come up with a solution that allowed us to get 90% of the wins with 90% of the safety without an API. And if, it would protect against you doing an async operation and then disposing, but it wouldn't protect against you having multiple threads all accessing the same StreamWriter at the same time, for example. Because, one of those is potentially a common mistake, and one of those is you kind of have to work hard to make that mistake.
And I'm fine with that part of it. It's that multiple threads thing, because we're already in a bad state.
Right.
It's
it's
that async and then dispose while the async isn't finished.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. Like that async and then dispose, I believe that is trivial to avoid returning the pool in that case.
Is that true?
Yeah, you just remove the buffer from the field, and then put the buffer back into the field when the operation completes. If you're accessing it serially, there's no concern there about, dispose will see null in the field. It won't have anything to return. It's the interlocked operations to do that safely across multiple threads where you take a huge perf hit.
Yeah,
so I'm suggesting,
If that particular one, I think I'd be okay with.
So if we could do
okay.
sort of 90% of the perf gains with 90% of the safety, I'm waving my hands, and we could do it without adding API, and so we could kind of bank these benefits now and concurrently have discussions about adding array pool or some other pool to signatures to kind of make sure we're comfortable with it. To me, that's sort of the right way forward. And also then, if necessary, if we're concerned about that last 10% of safety, having some kind of quirk to allow you to get out of it if you find yourself in a bad situation. And potentially for NetFX, if we did bring that perf improvement back to desktop, maybe it would be quirked in the opposite direction, or maybe it's just, the quirk would still apply.
Do we even have a way to do quirks on core?
We do. It's in terms of, you can set kind of an environmental Boolean that will apply from app context or whatever it's called.
No, like config file though. You have to do it programmatically.
No, I believe there is a config file.
There's a config file and like code. We read it from a JSON file, runtime.json, I think. It's been a while, but I think that's how we did it.
Anyhow, to finish my thought, if it's not possible to do the 90% thing, then, you know, I do agree we should have some way of opting into this. And at that point, I think we just need to decide how much control we want to enable versus how much future proofing we want to protect ourselves with.
Right. So I've marked the API now as needs work because it seems like Stephen's meta point of like, can we get most of the wins without making it too unsafe? I think it's something we should be looking into because if we could get away with not making a new API, that would arguably be better. Of course, hinges on the fact that we get it right and safe for the most part.
Sure, and you know we could always add the API later and like take perf away from people.
Yeah, and I think if
as a temporary thing until they opt in.
Yeah, I think the biggest wins that we would get from adding public APIs for pooling here would come from integrating with whatever pools are being used elsewhere in this environment, and the big one would be with the pooling that they're using as part of pipelines, which is all owned memory based, and so we'd kind of really want to be able to have them supply or ASP.NET supply a pool that would sort of match that. And I don't know, maybe you could build an array pool that kind of did the right thing, but I'm not sure you could. Since we just give out arrays, we don't even give out index and offsets into the array. So I think it would make it challenging to integrate at that level.
Okay. Do you want to like comment on the thing on to like addressing that one scenario?
Yeah, sure.
I think that's the only one that like I'm super concerned about. I don't like the others, but I agree that they're getting more vanishingly remote. So if that one, because we already addressed the some sort of like the double returns, we did that already.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you basically just remove the array from the field when you start the operation and put it back when you finish the operation, that pretty much eliminates all concerns other than concurrently or in parallel making multiple invocations at the same time.
Yeah, and I think I'm fine with it. So like if we call those two out, it's like we don't want double returns. We don't always guarantee about that, right? On a single thread, or even a multiple thread, because that's easy to do, right?
Yeah.
That one's an easy one to guard for, right? Because that's just on the dispose.
So all right, I'll follow up on that thread. It probably won't be till tomorrow though.
All right, no problem.
Alrighty, it seems like we're then done with the triage because I want to use the remaining 20 minutes for something else. Then, alright, live stream ends now. Thanks guys online, and I think we'll share notes later. Bye bye.
And by the way, we're down to 7